Hello everyone, this is Max here with the Zero Lab. Today I got a Snorlax Masterclass for you. We're going to be walking through the Snorlax Stall deck and its matchups in the Temporal Forces format. Thanks for joining and let's get started. Here is a copy of a basic deck list. This is a pretty standard list that people are playing. You'll notice that it's got 3 Crushing Hammers in it, which is really starting to pick up in popularity. So that's just one thing of note. But we got the, pretty standard stuff across the board. We got the Quad Snorlax, the Rotom for Draw, Chi-Yu to Mill. Before, some people were playing the Crabominable V, but that was definitely not very popular. I don't think I've seen a stall list without the Chi-Yu nowadays here. So definitely a staple in this deck now. Got the Pidgeot V to prevent yourself from decking out, and then the last Pokemon we have is the Mimikyu to try to wall out some of these EXs and Vs. The supporter count has changed a little bit since pre-rotation. You're still going to have that 4 count of Arvin, 3 count of Penny, 2 count of Erica's, 2 count of Boss. That all stays the same. Where the changes come in is we have access to this new supporter, Airy, now, allowing us to discard cards from our opponent's hand. This is definitely a game changer for the deck, where before, if your opponent was able to get all their switch cards in their hand, you had to combo like Ionoing them later in the game and then trying to Misfortunes Sisters them from there. But now, their switching cards not being safe in their hand means that Iono is a lot less important. So you can see we only play 1 copy now. The lack of Peonia now means that our prizes can be a lot more detrimental to us. So because of that reason, we play 2 copies of Silene. Silene's just super, super important in order to keep the loop going on our most powerful supporters. And so for that reason, I think 2 Silene makes a lot of sense. I would definitely say play 2 Silene pretty much no matter what. We have the 2 Silene, 1 Yelcheer. You can get by with 2 Silene even if you prize the Yelcheer. We're going down from 3 copies of Misfortune to 2. Aries just generally going to be a better card, but still pretty good to get these switches out of their deck before they're able to draw into them, so still important. This list is playing 2 Yakumo. That's definitely something that will be different depending on which stalls list you look at. I think the heavier count of Yakumo right now is just because of how much Lugia is in the format, and so I think people are testing just having 2 copies of Yakumo to try to give them a better matchup into Lugia. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't know if double Yakumo gives you enough of a chance or enough of a better matchup against Lugia to have it worth taking up 2 spots in your deck, but I could still see 1 for sure, because that also helps into like arc decks. And then we get the Hero's Cape. That's definitely the obvious A-spec to play. We don't really need another gusting effect since we play 2 Boss for Counter Catcher. The Hero's Cape is really nice too. My favorite thing about the Hero's Cape is that you can put it on your Rotom. That's been like one of the coolest plays I think that we have access to now, is just being able to cape up your Rotom and stop it from getting KO'd. Like against Giratina, now they have to Star Requiem it. They can't just do Lost Impact, or they're only going to do 280. And it will have 290 now, so pretty cool. And then we see 1 copy of the Defiance Vest. Defiance Vest was good last format too, I think, but also very good this format. It just can change some math and some matchups. For example, Cramorant does 110, so even if you have a Charm on there, the 110 plus 110 is still a 2-shot, but Defiance Vest can turn it into 70, 70, 70, which is what you need to do to knock out a Snorlax. So it turns into a 3-shot, which can be pretty relevant. And then the Defiance Vest can also be relevant in some other matchups. And then we see this is playing a copy of Artisan. Losing VIP means it's a lot harder to get set up. So just having 1 more out to getting our Snorlaxes down can be pretty important. And then finally, 2 Fire Energies. A big obstacle for Snorlax Stall now in this format is how much more popular Skwovet seems like it's going to be. If you want to turn a tie into a win, you're going to probably have to deal with Skwovet in a lot of matchups, especially Bibzard. So 2 fires makes sense, so we can use that Flame Surge attack on Chi-Yu to kill Skwovet. and then try to get rid of rods before we do that with our Misfortune Sisters and Aries, so they can't like recycle it. I've seen other combinations of energy cards. Sometimes people are playing even more than 2 energy, so maybe like a fire, a psychic, and a luminous, or 2 fire and a luminous, or 2 fire and a psychic. So that way we can throw the Mimikyu in there as another option to KO Skwovet. So that is the basic list that I think this is pretty close to what most people are playing, like in online tournaments and in Japan. Some other includes in the deck. The Mantine is something that I probably would play in the deck. I think it's just such an important it's such an important win con in a lot of matchups when now people are going to feel like they might be able to discard their blue guys, their Manaphies or their Luminions or whatever. So just having access to the Mantine can really make your life a lot easier, I think. And I think I would definitely play it, like if you were to play this deck to EUIC. Like I was talking about before, we could opt to play copies of Luminous Energy to give us access to that Mimikyu attack. If you're playing a bunch of Temples, then the Luminous loses a little bit of value, but still not bad. You have the option of playing a Radiant Charizard. This is something we've seen in the Pidgeot control lists in order to like get aggressive and take some knockouts. If your opponent just tries to set up with like one guy on their board and just trying to stop you from bossing other things up, you could potentially go with a Radzard play late game and just win on the spot. Some lists in the past have played Pokemon League Headquarters. This gave a better matchup against Miraidon and Roaring Moon. Those decks don't really seem to be a thing in this next format, but it's a card to keep in mind just in case other like basic decks pop up that this could help into. Could be okay into some like Lost Box decks, try to spread their energy out a little thinner, but I think it's on the lower end of good cards to include. Another option is this collapsed vacuum combo. We lost Avery, and so if your opponent fills their bench, like if Gardevoir fills their bench with stuff that can attack, you don't have a way to clear off your bench otherwise. So this can give you a way to clear off their bench and Erica's or Mantine something onto it. It seems okay. I think there's a lot less things in this format that like can win by filling their bench, like Miraidon and Guardy could last format, but still something to keep in mind. And then Lost Vacuum is just kind of generally useful. There's some tools like getting rid of a Choice Belt from Charizard or something like that can be useful. We've seen this Gengar package pop up in some lists like Charizard, and I've even seen it played in Chimpa. I think today we had a cup that was likely won by someone playing that Gengar in the Charizard. And so if it happens to pick up steam right now, it's not super popular, but it's seeing some play. If it became a really standard include for Charizard decks, this TM Devo is definitely a nice option. It gives you a way to win that matchup when otherwise the Gengar pretty much just makes it free. And you can also just always Silene the TM Devo back if you need to use it more than once. So definitely can be nice in some matchups. It also is pretty good into a deck like Chi and Pao. Baxcalibur is such a good attacker for them that if they're able to get one set up, this could be another way to deal with it. But that's already a pretty good matchup, so not really necessary. It's more for Gengar. And finally, if you think that control is going to be very popular, if you're going to go to a local, there's going to be a couple control decks there. The Patrol Cap can make the mirror a lot easier, just slapping it on your Chi-Yu, and then just you're able to mill them, they're unable to mill you. So that's also something to keep in mind. General tips for the matchup. You just always want to play to set up. Like if you have Arven in your opening hand, you're always going to play Arven. If you don't have Arven, you're probably going to play Iono. With the lack of VIP now, you can't go Arven for VIP. So most of the time, you're going to be Arvening for a Nest Ball and Sealstone. And really, it feels bad compared to last format, but Sealstoning for another basic is a really, really good play now. Like, don't feel bad at all about Sealstoning for a Snorlax on your first turn just to get into the game. It kind of it seems like a less powerful use of your Sealstone, but just like getting into the game, getting your board set up is so important. So that's, I think, going to be a staple play in the deck. If you don't end up using the Seal Stone on Rotom, I really like getting like a Bravery Charm or the Hero's Cape on the Rotom. The Rotom is just so important for being able to cycle through your deck and see cards. I think it's pretty much always worth putting a tool on your Rotom just to give it a little bit extra security. You'll want to identify your win con in each matchup. This just means identifying what is going to be the way that you can win the game. What Pokemon can you get into the active and stall them out? Know how many switching cards they play. Yeah, knowing the counts of cards and all these archetypes. Knowing how many switches they play. Knowing if they play Turos or not. Just knowing what to play around is really important. Other decks, maybe they don't really need to play around what your opponent has quite as much, but with Snorlax, like, you definitely have to play around what your opponent has. Checking your prizes is extremely important now that we don't have Peonia. You have to know, like, if the important one of card in your deck is prized, because if it is, then maybe you're just better off just scooping quickly and moving on to the next game. So checking your prizes is important. I always check Pokemon, counter catchers, and then, yeah, whatever cards are important to that specific matchup. And then finally, make sure to play decisively. I think a mistake that a lot of players make is thinking that Snorlax is a deck that ties a lot, which can be true, but a lot of the times you're tying because your opponent was taking a long time on their actions and not you. Really, like, you should be able to win games by just running your opponent out of resources quickly. So play decisively. Make sure that your opponent can't, like, Iono stall you out. And yeah, some additional tips. Allowing your first Snorlax or whatever you started, as long as it's not a V in your active, to get KO'd is usually a good thing for you. This is going to turn your counter catchers on, which is really important. So you don't really want to waste your tool cards on that first Snorlax in the active spot. Just allow it to get KO'd and turn those counter catchers on. Making sure to manage your supporter recovery is really important. We're playing those 2 copies of Silene and 1 Yell Cheer along with 2 Pal Pads. You're pretty okay to aggressively use your Pal Pads, like to cycle back either Erica's or Misfortune Sisters or Aries, whatever's relevant in the matchup. You want to use those Pal Pads to cycle them back, but then you also want to make sure that you're leaving yourself enough ways to get those cards back, so that way you're still able to cycle them later in the game. Before, the rule was you always wanted to Silene before you Yell Cheered. But now that you play 2 Silenes, that rule is a little less relevant. As long as you have a Silene left in deck, you're pretty good to... you don't want to have your last way to recover be Silene. You either want to have a Pal Pad left when you play your last Silene, or you want to have a Yell Cheer left when you play your last Silene, I guess would be the new way to put it. Another really important thing in Snorlax Stall is knowing when to penny your Rotom. This can be the biggest difference on whether you win or lose a game. The Rotom is always going to be an out to your opponent to switch by bossing it up. And so if you can penny it at the right time, once you're in a spot where, like, it's okay to not draw more cards, and if you get Iono'd, you're not going to lose on the spot. It can be kind of tricky to know exactly when to do it. It definitely takes a little bit of practice knowing when that timing should be. But if there's not a better supporter to play on a turn in the mid to late game, sometimes penning that Rotom and just taking away that option for your opponent can be really, really strong. So that's a key part of this deck. Now that we play Airy and Erica's, we have a couple ways to look at our opponent's hand. Just making sure that you're, like, if you have a little notepad, writing down any items that you see when you play your Erica's and writing down any basic Pokemon you see when you play your Airy. So that way you know if you're able to play the other one on a following turn. Like I mentioned before, sometimes your opponent is going to try to play a win for you into a tie by spamming Iono. So just make sure that you're keeping track of time, knowing how much time you have left in this game, and if it's getting close, not being afraid to be aggressive with your Chi-Yu to start milling, just to try to take some turns off of the game. And then finally, a small tip might seem obvious to some people, maybe not so much obvious to other people. You don't want to pre-play your Pokegears unnecessarily. And by that, what I mean is if you're definitely going to play a supporter in your hand on a turn, there's no reason to play the gear and see what else you get. You're better off just holding it until like you would much rather play something that's in your deck than in your hand. Next up, we're going to go through some of the matchups and just talk about some of the key points. I started with some of the easier, more obvious matchups. So we're going to start with Charizard. Your win cons in Charizard is getting one of the blue guys out. Blue guys being any support Pokemon. Typically, it's going to be Manaphy or Radiant Greninja in a lot of decks. But honorary blue guys include like Jirachi, Rotom, those kinds of cards. Bidoof is another thing that you can get out in the active. The reason I don't include Bidoof with the blue guys is because the B-Barrel can attack. It's not a very good attack, but if your opponent flips enough heads, it can attack. So it's usually better to get something else in the active if possible. And then Radiant Charizard is something that Charizard doesn't really want to see in the active. It takes like most of their energy and it can only attack every other turn. So getting that in the active early can be not bad for you. Looking at lists, what Charizard lists are currently playing, they typically play a Turos. I think most lists have cut the switch by now, which lists were playing before. But if you're playing against Barrelzard, they are going to have that Squovit. And so Squovit's the biggest change in the Charizard matchup. If they get it down, they're going to be able to infinite their deck, so you'll never be able to deck them out. And so the way to deal with that is you're going to want to get rid of 2 Super Rods. Pretty much every list is playing exactly 2. So you'll want to try to Airy them or Misfortune Sisters the Rods until you see 2. And then you want to try to get in there with your Chi-Yu and knock out that Squovit. And then you'll be able to deck them out the rest of the game. So that's going to be your general strategy. MVP cards in this matchup will be your Mimikyu. That makes them have to get like a Charmander or a Charmeleon set up. And now most lists are actually playing the Charmeleon with the ability that stops effects of attacks done to it. And so that only does 50 damage. So that's great for stall. Even if you don't have a tool on your Mimikyu, that's a 2-shot. So that's good news for stall decks. The Charmeleon is way less effective than the one they used to play. I guess some of the Bibzard lists might play both. They'll play the one with the ability and the one that does 90 damage, but either way, you can still put like your Hero's Cape on the Mimikyu or a Bravery Charm. So mostly in this matchup, you're just going to want to spam Erika's until you hit something that they can't attack with, and then just using Penny to scoop up your Rotom, and then using, like we were talking about, Chi-Yu to kill the Squovit. And I think a few people have joined since now. Feel free to interrupt at any time, ask any questions if there's anything I missed or anything. No worries if there's any interruptions for questions. Moving on to Chimpa, this is another really, really good matchup for you. Some lists are playing the Manaphy, so if they play Manaphy, that's a great thing to get in the active. Bidoof, another pretty great thing to get in the active. Otherwise, you're just going to try to run them out of energy. With your Airy and Misfortune Sisters, getting rid of their Superiors and Rods. They also can use Prime Catcher and Canceling Cologne to retreat or switch, so hitting those off of these Airy Misfortune Sister cards are really good. The best attacker that Chien-Pao can use is that Kyogre that puts energy back in the hand. They conserve resources, it does a lot of damage, so that's definitely something you don't want in the active. And Baxcalibur is also a pretty strong card. It doesn't one-shot your Snorlax, but you don't have to waste any resources attacking with it. So that's typically what they're going to want to try to get set up. Chien-Pao can take big knockouts. It can do a lot of damage, but they have to go through so many resources. So having Chien-Pao in the active is definitely like much better than them having Kyogre or Baxcalibur. Your MVP cards in this matchup are just spamming Airy, spamming Misfortune Sisters. I grouped all the lost boxes into one slide here, but typically your strategy is going to be the same regardless of which type of lost box it is. You're going to want to trap either a Comfey or a Manaphy into the active spot. And sometimes one of your win cons is if they're like playing a lot of Colress, digging through their deck, sometimes you can get them with a Chi-Yu Mill towards the end of a game. Most lists are playing 4 Switch Cart, a Prime Catcher, 2 to 3 switches, and some amount of jet energy. Jet energies are a lot harder to deal with in this format since we don't have Sydney anymore, but we're still playing the Temple, so we can turn that off, even though they'll still have a couple stadium outs to that. If they're playing the Minior super effective glasses in their Lost Box build, you have lost. That matchup is so terrible. The best thing you can do is just try to loop between your Pidgeot V and your Mimikyu with like the Defiance Vest on. The Pidgeot V resists fighting, and with Defiance Vest, Minior hits Mimikyu for 0. And so that's your best way to deal with it. But if they just, it's so easy for them to get it set up right away and get swinging into your Snorlaxes, sometimes you can't do that fast enough. But that would be your out to winning this game, is just getting your Pidgeot down, getting your Mimikyu down, and then just looping those two as necessary. Sometimes they'll play a Spiritomb. Spiritomb is one of the worst cards you can see against Stall. Even though Mew has rotated, people are still playing the Spiritomb for like Charizard and Lugia, just stopping like Lumineon and Rotom. So it still pops up and Snorlax gets hit as collateral. And then one other thing that Lost Box decks can do is they can opt to not take any knockouts early. Just try to get to 10 cards in the Lost Zone and then just spread damage with Sableye. The downside to this method for them is that gives you time to mill with your Misfortune Sisters and Airy and try to get rid of switches quicker. But that means that you'll never be able to use Counter Catcher when they're doing this, so it'll be harder to stop the Sableye from attacking. The best attackers in this deck is going to be that Roaring Moon EX, which a lot of lists are playing. They can attack with the Frenzied Gouging and knock themselves out. This could potentially turn off your Counter Catchers, and it can make it so your Iono only draws you 4 cards instead of 6. And then also if they do it like 2 times, if they knock out the Roaring Moon and then they put it back out and knock it out again, then they can attack with Radiant Charizard very easily, and that's pretty bad for you as well. So something to keep in mind. Again, your MVP cards for this matchup are going to be Airy Misfortune Sisters, just trying to spam those switches out of their hand and out of their deck. And Crushing Hammer can also be relevant if you're milling their rods as well. It can just make it a little bit harder to attack. This is definitely a matchup that I think has gotten better with this new format, but it's still not like a great matchup. It's definitely still slightly favored for Lost Box, and definitely strongly favored if they play the Minior, I think. Next up, we got Lastina. This is also kind of a tough matchup. Same thing. If they're playing the Manaphy, you want to trap that. If not, you want to try to get their Greninja, their Comfey stuck in the active. Typically, they're playing 3 to 4 switch cards, 0 to 2 switches. So usually 4 to 5 switch cards in total, plus a Prime Catcher. And then they're playing 3 to 4 Jets. Again, Jets are a little bit more problematic since we can't Sydney them anymore. But they're usually only playing 1 to 2 stadium outs, so we can possibly run them out of stadiums with our own temples and turn the Jets off that way. Crushing Hammer definitely is really, really good in this matchup. If you're able to mill their rods and Crushing Hammer their grass energies, that's going to be the best way to take on this matchup. Again, our MVP cards are going to be Airy Misfortune Sisters. This is going to be the same in any deck that is a comfy deck. Crushing Hammer, like we said, and then just getting those Temple of Sinnohs down. Turbo Hands is a pretty good matchup for us, at least the way that the deck is currently built. We just want to get that Iron Crown into the active. Most lists are only playing the electric energy, so getting Iron Crown just means we win, and they're pretty much the only switch card that they're playing is Prime Catcher. They're like playing Prime Catcher and the Future Booster Energy Capsule, but that doesn't do anything for them since they can't retreat. Some lists, I think, are starting to play switch cards. If they're playing like 2 or 3 switch cards, it's pretty important that you mill them, because if they're just able to get into like an Iron Hands and amp you for like 160 and take 2 prizes on your Snorlax, that can get out of hand pretty quickly. It's also possible that they might play like a Psychic Energy so they can attack with the Iron Crown. That can also be kind of annoying too, but that's not going to be that relevant or that good, but it is something that they could do. Mimikyu is not very good in this matchup since they can just attack with the Baby Miraidon. And so, yeah, you're mostly just going to be spamming Erika's until you hit an Iron Crown, or if they discard it, you want to, you can Mantine it. Gardevoir is starting to pick up a little bit of steam, it seems like. Definitely not as strong as it was last format, but still not a terrible deck. Same kind of idea. You want to get the blue guys out. If you can't get the blue guys out, you just want to run them out of energy. They play less energy than before. I think lists were typically playing like around like 8 energy, 8-9 energy. And so it'll be easier to keep bossing different things up until they don't have any more energy to put on their guys. I think lists are typically playing 1 Turos, 1 Palpad, and I think that it's so if you can mill the Palpad, that definitely makes things a lot easier for you. They're typically going to want to attack with Screamtail or Drifloon. They're both like pretty decent attackers. And so yeah, just spamming Erika's or using the Mantine if they discard things. I think yeah, the Mantine is just like pretty important overall. If you're not playing Mantine and your opponent like calls you on that bluff, you're just like never going to be able to Erika's anything because they'll just refine all of the bad attackers away. Coming up on one of the worst matchups for us is this Lugia. It's this new Lugia deck. They typically play like 1 copy of Lumineon V, so that's generally going to be your win con, is trying to get that trapped, using our Temple of Sinnoh and our Yakumo to, 1, turning off their jets, and 2, getting rid of any energy they have on the board. Like you're going to want to try to Yakumo once they've put energy on a couple of their guys. They play typically 17 special energy is the number that most lists are going to play. So keeping track of that. Yeah, this is a pretty terrible matchup. And especially if they just like start Minccino and then they just go attach, pass, evolve, attach, and then just start swinging from there, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And so hitting an early Erika's is really important, so they can't do that much. Good players are just not even going to put a Lugia down if they don't have to. But we all know how Lugia bots are, so a lot of times they are just going to like go wombo combo, get out 2 Archeops, and that's not actually that good for them. Lets them power stuff up faster, but that gives you a little bit more of a line than if they just go like lone Cinccino. And the Cinccino has 110 HP, so we can't even like KO it with like the Chi-Yu. It will be 10 short. Crushing Hammers are also like relevant in this matchup. Just trying to run them out of energy. It's pretty tough, and it's heavily favored for Lugia, but you do have a couple of lines to play towards, especially if you're playing against like not the greatest players. Tusk Mill, this is super, super, super favored. You have a couple different ways of going about it. You're just going to go for the deck out on them. You have 2 routes you can take. You can take the aggressive deck out route or the passive route. The aggressive route being turn 1, you just like get Chi-Yu into the active and start swinging as soon as possible. Basically, you're going to be milling 2 from them every turn, but they're also going to be milling themselves, because if they want to mill 4 from you instead of 1, that means they have to play either the Professor Sada's or the Explorer's Guidance. And so Sada's is going to be -3 from their deck, and Explorer's Guidance is going to be -6 from their deck. So you're pretty much always coming out on top in terms of a mill trade. The other route that you can choose to go is if you're able to find that Radiant Greninja, say they start it, or say you find it off an Erika's early, you could also just like go with the Snorlax and just keep the Greninja trapped so they can't do anything, and then just start milling with Airy and Misfortune Sisters, going for their Palpads, going for their Super Rods, and then later on go into your Chi-Yu. A lot of times, I think most lists are playing a copy of Hand Trimmer. That's something to keep in mind. It can be really annoying if you get Hand Trimmered. That can really shrink the amount of cards you have access to. There's not really anything you can do to play around it other than milling it before they find it. So just something to keep in mind. Like they play the Pidgeot V, So they can infinite if you're not hitting them with the Chi-Yu. And then also putting the Hero's Cape on your Chi-Yu is pretty good in this matchup. The Great Tusk is typically just going to mill, but they do have the option to attack with it. And so usually they're going to have like 2 fighting and a double turbo on it. And if they do that, that means they are doing, I believe it does 140 at that point with a DTE on it, 160 without the double turbo. And so if you have a Hero's Cape on it and they swing twice into you with the attack, it'll be 280 and then you can penny it. So Hero Cape and the Chi-Yu is pretty good in this matchup. But anyway, this is a very, very, very favored matchup. Arc Vulpix is definitely a tougher one. The Arc decks in general are a little bit tougher. Just because we don't have Sydney anymore, like I mentioned earlier. Again, you're just going to want to go for the Bidoof. Some lists are playing Greninja, so that works too. And otherwise, you're just going to want to try to get as many things on their board with Mantine and Erica's, and just try to keep bossing around things and splitting up their energy. They're typically going to play a Prime Catcher, a Switch, and a Turos. So that's 3 ways to switch. If you're able to mill the Prime Catcher and the Switch, that's going to help a lot. But again, they can attack with most things on their board. And Mimikyu is not even a good out for you since they have the Shred with the Vulpix V-Star. So just timing, having a well-timed Yakumo is probably your best shot at winning this matchup. If they have like a DTE on an Arc, a DTE on an Arc V-Star, and like a V-Guard on their Vulpix or something like that. If you want to get big value off the Yakumo if possible. Artina, it's pretty similar. They also play a Bidoof, B-Barrel line. So just trying to get that out into the active. I've seen a lot of lists playing the Spiritomb. If they're playing the Spiritomb, that's probably a basically unwinnable matchup. That's like really, really bad for you. And then you're also going to have to deal with the Squovit. So pretty bad overall for you. Dealing with the Squovit's very hard when they can knock out basically any of your guys with their Tina V or Arceus V-Star. So the best you can do is just try to get the B-Barrel down. I hope they prize the Squovit. If they don't prize it, you're going to have to try to take a knockout with your Chi-Yu. You'll probably have to put the Hero's Cape on it so they can't Lost Impact you. And then just playing against Stall, some of the most common mistakes I see players who play against Stall make is they use their switch cards or their boss's orders without a purpose. So they're just playing it to play it and not taking a KO. You basically, ideally, you want to make sure that every switch card or every boss's orders that you play is netting you at least 1 prize. And if you play that way, that's going to give you the best shot at winning. Targeting your opponent's Rotom aggressively, that can make it so Stall can't find the cards that they need to win the matchup. And so if you're able to, burn a couple extra resources to kill a Rotom, it's pretty much always going to be worth it. Spiritomb is a busted card in this matchup, which seems really, really obvious, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen my opponent play a couple Nest Balls, get some stuff down, play the game, and then I play Misfortune Sisters, and I see in the top 5 cards, I see a Spiritomb, and I say, why isn't that guy on the bench? That makes no sense. I guess some people think that they don't want it to get trapped, but with its attack, it can never get trapped. So if you have Spiritomb in your deck, just always play it against Stall. There's no reason not to. If they're not playing the Mantine, you can just call them out and say, I don't think you're playing the Mantine. I'm just going to Ultra Ball away my guys. If you have a particularly really bad matchup against Stall, such as like Charizard, I think that might even be the way to go, is just Ultra Balling all of your blue guys away and just like hoping they don't have the Mantine. Some people are playing it, some people aren't, so that could be a route to take, so that way you don't get Erica'd. And then don't be afraid to, in a best of 3, to scoop game 1 early. Scooping a game where like they hit a really crazy Misfortune Sisters and just like kind of bodied you really early on in the game. A lot of times you always have the chance to donk them, and so like it doesn't really serve you much purpose to play out a game where you're like probably gonna lose. Just take the loss, move on to game 2, and just try to go for the donk. So that was just a quick introduction to all of the matchups and some tips and tricks that I have found in my time playing the deck. I'll open up this time now for any direct questions that anyone might have. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about any matchups?
Do you ever consider Lost City in this deck whenever you're targeting down the Squobit?
Yeah, so Lost City is definitely an option. The problem is it can be hard to find it on the turn you want it. And I think that you already just have such an easier time getting rid of rods with Misfortune and Airy that it's usually just probably going to be easier to go that route rather than dedicating a spot to put Lost City in the list. But it is something you could choose to do, I suppose. All right, well, if there are no more questions, that is my masterclass presentation. Thanks for joining and tuning in, everybody. And maybe we'll do another deck in the future.